Chris, I can turn it over to you and you can get the meeting going.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Naomi. And I'm going to play pass the ball and let Jason and Samantha start us off from the UTC side of things. And yeah.
Well, good evening. I'm Samantha Doyle. I'm an administrative law judge that's working on this project. Just want to also introduce Jason Lewis. If you want to say anything special as well.
Hi, I'm Jason Lewis. I with UTC in the legislative program, and appreciate everyone joining tonight.
Thanks, Jason and Samantha. So introducing ourselves, my name is Chris Trashik. I'm the project lead on this project. I've been modeling energy both in the oil and gas side of things, and then on the kind of more of the demand energy use side of things for over the last 20 years. And I look forward to talking with you all about the results that we've gotten so far, and then getting your input into how we want the decarbonization scenarios to look like. And I will pass it over to Darren.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Darren Crockett. I am also a modeler with SSG. I've been modeling energy systems for about 13 years now. And yeah, just happy to work on this project. And I will pass it over to Carol.
Hi everybody, I'm Carol Fraser. My pronouns are they, them. I am a specialist in community and regional planning and sustainable design. And I've worked in planning and economic development for about a decade. Nice to see you all. I'll pass it over to Aaliyah.
Hey everybody, it's great to have you here. My name is Aaliyah and I'm on the engagement team at SSG. I'm working as an engagement specialist on the project. I'll hand it over to Naomi.
Thanks very much, Aaliyah. Hi, everyone, and I'm Naomi Devine. I'm the engagement lead on this project. I've been a climate action planner for almost 20 years, which is hard to believe. And I'm looking forward again to hearing your comments and your feedback this evening. So with that, if you'd like to open the chat at the bottom of Zoom, you can introduce yourselves as well. We'd love to hear from you, your name, and if you represent an organization or not, and what part where you're joining us from too would be great to know. So feel free to do that. With the chat open this evening too, that'll be helpful for receiving links to interactive tools like Mentimeter and Miro that we are going to be using this evening. And if at any time you have any difficulties, the team is here to help you with that. And we have some alternate pathways to participation in case some technical barriers we can't fully overcome. So for the meeting operating guidelines for this evening is let's share our airtime in order to listen to and hear from as many perspectives as possible. Let's manage our participation together to start and of course end on time. Your time is valuable, so we want to make sure that we don't go over this evening. And of course, let's use a respectful and inclusive language. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of Zoom etiquette too, to make things a little bit smoother for everyone, please stay on mute when not speaking, and then use the chat to ask questions, especially if a question comes up as a presentation is happening. There's a lot of information to share, and we recognize that there's a high volume of information, so we don't want you to lose your question. We want to be able to answer it. If we can answer it in the chat in stream, we'll answer it right away, and if not, we'll save it for the question and answer period and come to it there. A note that we do record all questions too, and so those questions and answers are recorded in a spreadsheet, and we list the answers after the meeting on the project website as well. And in a moment, Aaliyah will share the project website in the chat too, in case you don't have it. And yeah, welcome, Nancy. We want you to use the raise hand function if you can, and that's at the bottom of your Zoom bar. So there's reactions, and if you click on reactions, there's a raise hand and other reactions in the bar there for you to use. And so when we come to the question and answer, that's an opportune time to use that, and let us know your name and affiliation if you have one at that time as well. And of course, you would have got a note when you signed in to Zoom, and just a reminder that we are recording this session. All of these sessions are recorded, and they're also placed on the project website as well. And Aaliyah's put the link to that in the chat too, in case you don't have it. Thanks very much, Aaliyah. All right, next slide, please. All right, in terms of today's to-dos, we are going to, what we're here to do today, what we're gathered here to do today is to review the business as usual, or you'll hear us refer to it as a BAU, and the business as planned, BAP, projections. We're going to gather input into the decarbonization scenario. So we have an activity this evening that shows you 2 main scenarios, and to start to get your feedback on those. And we're going to look at scenario parameters and the data assumptions and sources. So you'll see those as well. What we're not here to do today, to be clear about that, is we're not here to review decarbonization scenario results. That happens at another time. And if I'm incorrect about that, Chris will let me know. Okay, next slide. All right, I'll turn it over to Aaliyah to do who's in the room with us tonight, and we'll start using our interactive tool, Menti.
Thank you, everyone. So we have this interactive tool that'll give us a chance to kind of get to know who's here. So please go to www.menti.com on your phone or on browser on your computer and type in this code or use this QR code to log in. I've also sent you a link directly to the Mentimeter presentation. Chris, would you be able to swap over to Menti? So the first question we'd like you to answer is, where are you joining us from? To get a sense of which parts of Washington everybody is here from.
Oh, we have someone joining us from Kittery, Maine. Wonderful. My family used to live there, not there, but near there for about 20 years. They lived in New Hampshire, Dover, New Hampshire to be specific. All right, Oregon, West Seattle, Covington, Bellevue. Welcome to the new attendees. If you've just joined us, please open the chat, and we have a link to Mentimeter tonight. We're asking just right now, where are you joining us from? Spend about another minute on this. Welcome from Olympia and Vancouver. And again, too, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat as well, that's also wonderful. And thanks very much for Nancy. Thanks for being able to join us tonight and kicking that off. Ellensburg as well, Spokane, Seattle.
This is great. We have such a diverse group so far, and not everyone has responded yet, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, good geographic distribution. So we've got 14 of you in Mentimeter. And so hopefully we can get a few more of you to join us in there as well, because we want to hear again from as many people as possible. Shall we go on to the next question?
Sure. So we'd love to know a little bit more about you. So let us know what kind of work you do. And by the way, information is just being taken anonymously. So we're not going to be, it'll be shared on the recording, but we're not going to be putting that out in any of our reports or anything.
All right, Mayor. So we've got an elected official with us this evening. That's wonderful. Someone who's retired, people who work in utilities, hydrogen development, a teacher, decarbonization strategy fellow for energy solutions. That's fantastic. Yeah, utility planning and regulation. Great. All right. For anyone who's just joined us, and just if you came in just after when Aaliyah reposted the link, I'll just also put the direct link to Mentimeter in the chat, so it's easy for you to get into. No codes, no login. All right, let's go on to the next question, please, because we've got good geographic distribution, some interesting backgrounds here too. What excites or intrigues you about this project? You think about the Washington decarbonization pathways decarbonization examination. What intrigues you about this? Fantastic. So many things. I'm really happy to hear that. That's wonderful. And feel free to get specific too, if you'd like, on what does, or if anything stands out. Reducing GHG emissions. Yeah. Addressing the challenge of climate change. Certainly. yeah, getting on a path to solve the climate crisis. Momentum can often feel really good, too, when you take the steps in the direction to achieve these goals. Enjoying, yeah, cleaner air, wonderful. Equitable transition away from carbon use, fantastic. All right, holistic plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, at least cost to customers. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. And we can move on to the next one. Or have we come to the end of Mentimeter? Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. Let's take a quick look at the agenda for the rest of the evening. Thanks everyone for your participation in that. It's helpful for us to get to know a bit who's in the room. So we're going to do a project overview and spend about 10 minutes on that. So as we come to each of these meetings, we've advanced a bit more in the project and want you to be up to speed and know exactly where we're at and where we're headed next. We're going to go over those BAU and BAP preliminary results, spend about 10 minutes on that. And then we have time for questions and answers all about that. So we can dig into that as much as you'd like. And then we're going to do the activity around the decarbonization scenario development. So these are just starting points for discussion to get a sense of your impressions of those and sort of early feedback. So we've given sort of 2 exemplar places to start from. And so we'll use Miro for that this evening. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So over to you, Chris, for a project overview.
Thanks, Naomi. So just to kind of remind everybody and ourselves, so what this project is about and what we're actually trying to look at. What are we scoped to look at? So the Commission is undertaking an examination to examine feasible and practical pathways for investor-owned electric and natural gas utilities to basically reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's kind of the overarching theme of this study, is looking at those different pathways, not coming up with a proposed solution necessarily, but coming up with different ways that the utilities and the state of Washington can decarbonize those systems. So the examination must identify these points outlined here. So I'm not going to read through them all. These have been shared, multiple times, and a lot of people, I'm sure, are very familiar with these. But the main thing is, how can natural gas utilities decarbonize? And as many said, what are the costs and benefits to the customers, including environmental, health, and economic benefits, and understanding the equity considerations with respect to low-income customers and highly impacted communities are very important considerations that we want to make sure that we're considering. And then finally, what are we working on together? So we're, like I said, we're working on examining energy decarbonization pathways that we can present to the commissioners for them to explore and get a better understanding of what options the state has, working with the utilities and with other members of the state, community members, different sectors, to achieve a certain level of natural gas emissions reductions. So this project is not about choosing one pathway, but about looking and exploring different alternatives and playing around with different parameters and different stories that we can explore. So what we've done so far, so we've calibrated the model to a 2019 base year. We've generated a business as usual scenario. So those 2 were presented in our first round of meetings. And in those first round of meetings, we also received feedback on what a business as planned scenario should look like. And so we've taken that starting point and integrated that feedback, and we've generated that business plan scenario. We want to share that with you all today. And we're also in the process of generating base year hourly demand profiles for that business's plan for the base year and those business plan scenarios, which we'll be sharing out in some form to the public in the near future. And then what's coming up next is that we're going to be publishing a data methods and assumptions manual, and so this is going to be a living document, which as we go through project and more assumptions are generated and input, for example, the decarbonization pathway scenarios would be integrated into that manual. So right now it's containing the assumptions and the methodology used for the calibration, as well as the business's plan portion of the modeling. So that is being put out to the public soon, and it will be updated as we go along through this project. We have some frequency asked questions, FAQs that we're going to be generating as well, just to, as we've been going along and getting similar questions, kind of collecting those and answering those so we can publish those out to the broader community as well. We have a number of briefs looking at different trends around different sectors within the state, and Carol will be touching on those later as a high-level overview, which can be used to kind of I guess spark some conversation around what decarbonization pathways could look like, or what could be included within those. And then as we talk about, the BAP results are going to be talking about that as well. So I'll pass it back over to Naomi, and she'll give a kind of a run through of the engagement process and where we're at right now.
Fantastic, thanks. So as we've talked about before, this pathway examination follows a similar pattern to climate action planning. So what we do is we weave in technical and engagement feedback along the way. I'm sure, sorry if you're hearing the doorbell there of people joining us when I'm speaking. And so what we do is we work between those two streams. So what you're seeing tonight is a presentation, of course, of the technical analysis done tonight. And we have a series of questions that we want to ask you to get your feedback on where we're at with respect to that. The generation of that, or the creation of that information at this point in the project. So there's multiple sort of stops, or sort of along the way, and each of those stops we ask you for some feedback that's calibrated to that particular point in the project. So it's never the whole project sort of all at once, is the point that I really want to stress, and that there's multiple streams that we are weaving, essentially together, that are shown sort of in this diagram as an example. So we're in the middle of the active engagement period. There's two main streams of the engagement plan that are workshop based, and then there's going to be a survey to the broader public as well, are the main components. And the workshops are, some of you might be sitting on the Decarbonization Advisory Group, or DAG for short, and this is the technical open meetings. Essentially, these groups, the same information is presented in each of them, and the DAG was formulated to honor the requests in pre-engagement when we were speaking to stakeholders then about how to be engaged, to make sure that there was representation in the process as well. So we created a parallel stream. So the same information is presented at both bodies. The feedback that's received at these meetings is treated the same and is incorporated along the way. So the information tonight has also been presented at the DAG. They've had their meeting too. This is the technical open meeting too. And so we have 2 more meetings remaining in the process. So we're in the active engagement period right now. Next slide, please. In terms of the approach to review it again, is it set it, involve, or collaborate for influence on the decision being the pathways that will be examined and carried forward when the project is done. So we're not the deciders in all of this, but we're the SSG puts together those pathways examination with your involvement as well. We will ensure that a transparent and accessible engagement process. So everything that we do too is recorded and it's placed on the project website. We make the information available. And again, we present the same information at both of the workshop stream meetings. And of course, if anyone wants to take the survey when it comes out, that will also be publicly available too. All of the questions that we take in these meetings are also collected and answered and also placed on the project website. So hopefully too, if you happen to miss a meeting that you wanted to come to, you can get up to speed basically with what was discussed in that meeting and the answers that were provided. We will use diverse techniques to effectively reach diverse stakeholders across the state. So that's why we have those techniques that I've discussed. And we will gather input on the social, economic, and equity impacts of decarbonization actions. So some more specific questions on those will come at future meetings, as well as we advance along the project sort of timeline that I showed you before. And we will design engagements to facilitate collaboration rather than polarization. And let's go to the next slide, please. In terms of when I said involve or collaborate on the previous slide, so that's based on the IAP2's spectrum of public participation. So answering the question about how much influence is there over the decision itself or the project that we're working on. And so it's in the involve and collaborate sort of spheres there, sort of in between there is where we've set it for this particular project. And let's go to the next slide, please. And so over to Darren for the BAU and BAP results. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, actually, that's over to Chris.
That's me. I'm going to grab it again, grab the mic. Okay, so the slides I'm going to be talking through have been presented already previously. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. I'm putting them in this presentation mainly for the record, so that because all of these are posted on the UTC portal and available to the public, so kind of keeping some consistency across each presentation. But I will be stopping on a number of key slides and talking about that, just so we can get to the part of the process where you all get to give feedback and have some time for that. So the business as usual, as we've defined it in the past, is a pathway to 2050. It doesn't include any intervention to energy systems or energy producing activities. State policies or major state policies or planning are not integrated into that scenario. And we're basically looking at taking the base year 2019 and putting some population and employment growth and distributing those current activities and patterns on that growth, what would happen in the state of Washington. It gives us kind of a reference point of a pretty much do nothing scenario. So the BAU assumptions include, like I mentioned, population, employment growth. There's some CAFE fuel standards that have been baked in that have been around for a long time that we've included. There's heating and cooling degree days projections. So for each county, we have different projections for heating and cooling degree day impacts. There's energy use or energy systems within the buildings, those stay constant going forward. And then we take that population and employment growth and we spread, or we generate new building demand in the residential and both the non-residential sectors based on each of those. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on these assumptions as again, we've been through these before and we've gotten the feedback, and we're going to skip to kind of the results and talk about how we've integrated that feedback into this. But for those who want to look at it, they would be in this presentation. You can explore it a little bit more deeply. So these are the employment growth, so population growth. This is the employment growth. These are the assumptions around the different other actions and policies that we've included. The business's plan definition. So in order for an action to be, or a policy to be considered in the business's plan scenario, we've created that, or together we've created the criteria that it must be in rule. There must be funding around that policy or that bill, or if it's legislatively required, and then that would make the cut. And also too, we were looking at different market trends to see if there is anything that is kind of already coming, that's already has momentum that we should include within that scenario. So for example, the BAP incorporates CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, the Climate Commitment Act, the Washington State Energy Code, Clean Buildings Act for Washington, the Move Ahead Washington policies, the Advancing Green Transportation, EV supporting infrastructure, and a number of other smaller kind of policies that we've included as well. And again, the tables here go through how we've defined those policies. And again, we presented this before and received feedback around this. I'm not going to talk to each of these slides. You can go and explore those if you want. If you have any comments or feedback, you can definitely reach out and provide it back to us. But what we heard from the feedback is that the CCA rules, or the Climate Commitment Act rules, they're evolving right now. They're not necessarily all set in stone. So we want to stay updated on that and make sure that we have the latest and greatest in our scenario. The focus on CETA is appropriate, less focus on Washington's Renewable Portfolio Standard and Energy Independence Act. Clean Building Acts for Washington. So initially we included tier 1 or tier 2 as a past and already kind of funded a policy, but it's not that far along yet. So we've taken that out of the business's plan. So those targets are not included anymore. It could be something that gets included in the decarbonization pathways. We did not include the clean fuel standards in the BAP, so that has been added to the results that you'll be seeing. And for additional context, a number of House bills that were suggested that don't necessarily kind of play into the sectors that we're looking at right now, but would provide additional context for renewable natural gas as a possibility in the decarbonization scenarios, is the organics materials management bill and reducing methane emissions from landfills. So we're aware of those, and we'll keep those explore those in kind of the future modeling. So what the results look like. So the business plan results. So the overall emissions, because of all those things that we've included and I just talked about, you can see there's a significant decline in emissions in the state of Washington over time. And as we'll see here in this wedge diagram, and what the wedge, how to read the wedge diagram is at the top is their business as usual or reference scenario. Each of these colored bars represents the policy or the action that we've modeled. So you can see here, this orange one is the advancing green transportation policy. Each of these is the emissions reductions from the baseline, and adding those all up, you can see this is how much emissions get reduced overall. So that matches the line that we just saw earlier. And the blue line here, or at the bottom, is the amount of emissions left over within the state that would have to be dealt with somehow if that was part of the goal or policy goals. So you can see here that CETA and the Climate Commitment Act are quite large, quite big wedges or quite big emissions reductions. And that makes sense because the way that those are written is basically utilities or the electricity system has to be basically decarbonized by 2045. I know there's two different timeframes for each of those, and sometimes they get mixed up in my head. I'm pretty sure CETA is 2045, and the Climate Commitment Act is basically decarbonizing kind of the fossil fuels or a number of fuels within the state by 2050. Like 90%, I think. Carol knows all the numbers off the top of their head. So, and so we didn't. And I guess to explain, so we didn't model exactly how those are going to happen in this case. We wanted to show the impact of those two policies on the overall trajectory of the emissions within the state, because there's a lot of different ways that those can happen, and part of that exploration is going to be happening in decarbonization pathways that we're going to be getting information and ideas from you all. So basically, these are kind of a blunt instrument way of just showing, having these goals met, this is what the impact would be on the emissions within the state of Oregon. So there's no policies necessarily around the Climate Commitment Act wedge here that's saying that X has to be done or Y has to be done. We're basically kind of fudging it in the background in the model for this case to look at what that impact would be, and then through the decarbonization pathways, we could explore possible kind of policies that could fall under the CCA umbrella or the CETA umbrella going forward. A couple more slides here. So the emissions by sector. So you can see here, because of the CCA and CETA, a lot of the emissions from the commercial residential sectors are basically kind of squashed and removed. But we still have a little bit within the transportation and in the industrial sector too. And one of the reasons why the industrial sector is so large is that the CCA is not really addressing the process emissions, so other non-fossil fuel related emissions within that sector. And so those have not been touched or diminished at all within the business's plan scenario. And then looking at emissions by fuel, so you can see, again, natural gas and gasoline have pretty much vanished by 2050. What's left over. Oh, another one that we haven't touched really is jet fuel. There's some some fuel oil left in within an industrial sector and things like that, but mainly made up of kind of industrial sector type of uses going forward. So, so those are the businesses plan results. I'm sure there's lots of questions. So I'll open up the floor for questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. Like we said, there's a lot of information there, but we've got time for questions and we're doing well on time overall. Feel free to use the reactions button at the bottom of Zoom to raise your hand if you'd like, and we can unmute yourself and we can have a conversation. We would love that. Or also in the chat, if you'd like to ask questions, we can take them there as well, whatever you prefer.
Oh, I see there's a question of Oregon and Washington. If I said Oregon, I apologize. I'm also working on a project with Oregon, so sometimes in my head they get mixed up.
They have similar policies as
They
well.
do have similar policies as well.
I just have different names, so.
So apologies if I slip up.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Aaron. Thanks, Aaron. In the last slide, what are the non-energy fuels?
Do you know what those are off the top of your head, Darren?
Well, generally they're emissions that come from sources other than combustion of fuels. So typically they are present in industries such as the cement industry. These particular numbers also include emissions from landfills, so methane emissions. And all of this data came from reporting to the EPA through their greenhouse gas reporting program.
Thanks very much for the question. Devin, in terms of where you can find the slides, they all get posted to the project website after the meeting. So Aliyah will post the link in a moment to the project website back in the chat for easy access. Thanks for that question. And Brett asks, can you please summarize how items 2 and 3 from the statutory criteria on one of the early slides are being incorporated into the modeling? So Brett, I think, are you referring to the introductory slides about the project overall, the ones that were on a purple background, if I recall correctly? Feel free to unmute yourself and let us know too, if you'd like.
Hi, yes, I think it was one of the intro slides on this presentation that had the budget proviso that outlining the criteria or the factors to be considered as part of the study. And I think it was items 2 and 3, but I'm not sure if you're able to back up. It basically had to do with electric system impacts, peak load impacts, electric utility interactions, and reliability, things like that. So yeah, that one.
This
Thanks.
one here? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Great. Good memory.
I guess 4 to the extent, you know, it's all, they're kind of addressing similar issues, but curious kind of where those fall and how they're being considered, to the extent you can share that. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So scope question here. Good one. Chris or Darren, who's best situated to answer this question?
I can
Darren start.
Okay, I'll take a first pass at it. Yeah, and I'm actually going to be talking about this in the next section when we talk about decarbonization scenarios and scenario analysis. But generally, what we're going to do is quantify certain elements of the scenarios. So in order to make insights on these clauses. So for example, the ability of electric utilities to procure and deliver electric power reliably, we're going to be doing an hourly analysis. So once we have annual demand, we're going to go hour by hour and look at how the demand matches our estimate of the available supply within that hour, and kind of assess the adequacy via looking at unmet load. And from there, we can explore different possible strategies for addressing that gap, whether it's looking into demand response to do load shifting, increasing efficiency measures to reduce the demand overall, incorporating storage or decentralized electricity, and then those kinds of things, and really play with that so that we can make insights into that area. And then so that's kind of, that sort of groups 3 and 4 together. In terms of delivering electricity to current natural gas customers, we're going to be looking at how the natural gas demand is displaced if we're looking at an electrification scenario, and looking at how efficiency measures essentially make space for additional electricity demand that will come from transitioning customers from natural gas to electricity. But all of these insights we're going to make based on quantified modeling outputs that will come out of the scenarios, and they'll be driven by the input assumptions that go into the scenarios, and we're going to talk about how those will be created for the rest of the meeting, really.
Yeah, and I guess to build on what Darren said, so any of those strategies or any strategies that you think would be useful in exploring to address those, like I think that's some of the information we're asking for or looking for as part of this. Part of this session is, you know, what should the decarbonization scenarios look like, and how can, you know, the work that you are all doing, I noticed you're from PSE, so, you know, the work that the utilities are doing to address this problem, because we're not necessarily coming here to say, you know, this is what the utilities should do. We're just trying to understand, you know, from a demand side, definitely what pathways can we explore, and then what are the impacts of that are on, what are the impacts of those decisions are on the supply side, and working with you all to get the best information we can to the commissioners.
Wonderful. Thanks, Darren and Chris. So we've got a question from Aaron. Will you be reviewing what the cause is of the significant emissions step down in 2025? And Aaron, I'm going to assume that that's related to a graph that we had on the screen. That one there, perhaps. Feel free to unmute yourself and let us know.
Yep, the emissions by fuel.
So that looks like it has to do with CETA kicking in. So there's a number of different kind of target points for CETA that to be met. And oh, Carol, you had something.
Yeah, 2025, I believe, is when the coal-fired power plant is vanishes, as we say, out of the picture. It's regulated out. So I think that's probably what the jump is there, at least in terms of CETA.
Great. Thanks very much for the question, Aaron. Steve asks, will you also be looking at the impacts to peak electric demand?
Yeah, we'll definitely be doing that. And as part of part of the scenario exploration, is, you know, one of the layers that Darren mentioned, we'll be looking at, you know, extreme weather events, you know, cold days, maybe dry summers and things like that, and how that would impact, obviously how that would impact the supply and the technologies that are being used to use that supply.
Great. All right. I think I'm going to move us on because we want to get to the scenarios that we sort of put in here too. And Darren's got some information to give us ahead of time before we get to that activity, and that we will be able to maximize the time in meeting in that activity, keeping in mind that you'll still have a week after tonight's meeting to continue to give us feedback on the Miro board that's yet to come as well. So Darren, over to you. And Devin, I think Chris will answer that question for you in the chat.
Okay. Sorry, I just have to move something around. Okay, so yeah, heading into decarbonization scenarios, I just want to start with basic definition. So what is a scenario in the context of this modeling exercise? So for us, a scenario is a possible future. It is a pathway. As a matter of fact, I might use scenario and pathway interchangeably, but it doesn't, the possible future that we're exploring doesn't have to be desirable. So we're not assigning preference to the scenarios. We're not saying this is the good scenario, this is the bad scenario. They're all equal, and we're just exploring differences between them. And it's also, we don't assume a likelihood of the scenario. So we're not trying to make a prediction or forecast about the future. It's not what we think will happen. It's that we're exploring what could happen, and if it did, what are the impacts? What are the implications? And also through this exploration, we're looking at the overall trajectory, so that the process of change, we're not just looking at a fixed point in time, like an endpoint 2050, and just see where we land. It's the journey of how we get there is important. Wait, back up for 1 second. Just quickly, characteristics of a good scenario are that it has to be plausible. It has to be relevant to the objectives that we're exploring. It should challenge conventional wisdom and maybe explore some alternative pathways. The scenarios should be different from each other. It's not very interesting if we build scenarios that are just, slightly different. We kind of want to explore kind of the differences. So we like to have divergent scenarios. And then kind of at the end of this, we want to be balanced. So we want to sort of balance between opportunities and challenges and risks and benefits. So, maybe stretch what we think is possible, but keep it somewhat grounded. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Chris. So the scenario development process that we'll be taking you through, we've just summarized in 3 steps, and they get more specific as we go. So the first step is just identification. So what we've done is we've identified 2 scenarios under 2 different broad themes of electrification and alternative fuels. And what we're going to spend time on today is defining actions that will create those scenarios, and then hopefully get specific about setting parameters. So how hard do we want to go on the actions, and by when do we want to complete the actions? So let's go to the next slide, which we've now seen 3 times. But this is, again, just to ground us on what the objectives of this exercise are. And again, just to reiterate what Chris summarized before, is we're trying to look at possible decarbonization actions and explore their impacts on the reliability of electricity procurement and delivery, costs and benefits to the end customer, and including equity considerations. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so how do we use scenarios? The first part is designing the scenario, and that's what we're going to be talking about later tonight. But we want to basically fill in those giant gaps, those giant wedges that Chris showed you, where the emissions targets show a certain reduction. We're going to fill in how are those reductions going to be achieved. So we're going to do that by defining the actions that will achieve emissions reductions. And these actions consist on both the demand side, where the energy consumers lie, and then on the supply side, where energy production happens. We quantify the results of the scenarios so that we can take a deeper dive on how those scenarios are achieving the emissions reductions and what the different implications of those pathways are. So quantifying electricity demand within a scenario, both annually and hourly, quantifying potential in-state renewable generation and imports and exports. What's the natural gas demand remaining throughout the scenario? What, if any, in-state alternative fuel productions do we want to include in the assumptions? What demand response actions are we going to make? What kind of assumptions are we going to make around energy storage? And this isn't an exhaustive list, but just to give examples. Some of these will be, depending on how we define the scenario, some of these will be explicit input assumptions. Some of these will be derivative outputs that are derived from and influenced by the input assumptions. And continuing, you can go to the next slide. We can take those quantifications even farther and apply cost intensities, so we can start to explore those cost impacts both in the demand sector, so looking at cost to households and businesses for, let's say, equipment installation, so heat pump installation or maintenance cost. Fuel costs will be important. On the energy production side, looking at potential cost impacts of adding renewable electricity generation capacity or alternative fuel production capacity. Looking at or estimating modeled transmission capacity usage. Looking at resource adequacy, as I described before, in terms of looking at unmet load hour by hour. And then looking at non-financial equity considerations, such as the health impact of pollution, access to transit, or jobs created through, for example, retrofit programs. So those are, again, more examples of further analysis that we do based on the modeling. The last few slides are really just visual examples of how we can compare scenarios. And these are just examples. These are not specific to Washington. But in this example, we're looking at emissions by fuel. In the chart on the left, there is still some amount of natural gas remaining in the system. So the overall emissions are a little bit higher. And then on the one on the right, the natural gas has been entirely displaced and the overall emissions end up getting lower. If you go to the next slide, Chris. This slide shows a breakdown both by sector and by fuel. If we look at the industrial bars on the left, we can see that natural gas use doesn't change from 2019 to 2050, but in the industrial bars on the right, it does. It's getting displaced by hydrogen. And then similarly, in the residential and commercial sectors, in the graphs on the left, we're seeing a big displacement of natural gas towards electricity, whereas in the ones on the right, we're seeing more of a presence of RNG. And then finally, this last slide shows heat system types. So again, in the scenario on the left, this particular scenario is going really hard on electric heat pumps, whereas the one on the right retains some resistance heating, as well as the introduction of natural gas heat pumps as an alternative. So that's kind of the brief overview of scenario analysis. I'm going to pass it to Carol now for talk about trends.
Thanks, Darren. So just a little bit more information to overload you all with before we get into the activity. The last piece here is just informing some of the research that we did around trends that informs some of the recommendations that we're putting into the initial scenarios, which we'll see in a moment. So first off, looking at demographic trends in Washington State, we know that Washington is one of the fastest growing states in the country right now, and that population growth is happening mostly in the Seattle area, or the urban areas, I should say, of Washington State. So we know that population growth is not necessarily happening in one place, and that population growth leads to more homes, more businesses, and potentially higher energy and electricity demand over time. We also know that the state is becoming more racially diverse, and that attention must be paid in the energy transition to make sure that as we're going down this road, the energy transition is equitable. So we're thinking about how are the benefits of decarbonization going to be distributed when currently the benefits of growth are not necessarily equitably or evenly distributed or experienced. So we also looked at economic shifts that are happening. And first of all, thinking about what's been the impact of the pandemic on the economy. We've seen more and more folks are working from home. That's shifting how much energy and electricity is needed at certain times of day, in particular locations. Research has shown that residential electricity use is up maybe 20–30%, or was during some of the lockdowns. So that's going to impact how suburban growth will happen, or how urban office and commercial buildings are using electricity. We've also noted how Washington companies are really taking a lead on sustainability. The top 5 employers in Washington, Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, et cetera, they all have sustainability targets and goals. So they're leading the way, and economically, there's a lot of opportunity that's emerging around decarbonization, and including decarbonizing industry. So industry and manufacturing is less and less of part of Washington's economy overall. The biggest employment sector is services, but of course, industry accounts for a lot of the emissions currently being produced, as the slides previously showed. So we're thinking through and understanding what are the opportunities already in existence in terms of reducing emissions or using alternative fuels in that regard. We're also looking at trends in the building sector and energy efficiency. So reducing energies or becoming more efficient over time has been something that Washington and the Pacific Northwest region has really excelled at over the years. And that's really going to be a consideration in our scenarios as well. So to what extent can energy use be avoided before thinking about switching what the fuels are to supply that demand? Part of that comes from the trends we're seeing around energy codes. So the Washington State Energy Code, the commercial version, there's residential version in the works. There's also local codes as well in terms of using gas for heating and water heating and that kind of thing. So we're incorporating that into our scenarios. And we're expecting them to reduce the energy demand of existing buildings through the Clean Buildings for Washington Act and the benchmarking program that's going on right now, and that will be rolled out further. And then finally, we're taking a note at some of the technology that's becoming available in terms of demand management, smart thermostats, things connected to utilities directly, that kind of thing, and the kinds of integrated, in terms of building integrated distributed energy that is becoming more common and more popular across the state. And then finally, we looked at, or not finally, sorry, a few more. We looked at renewable energy. So what the trends are there in terms of its price competitiveness. It really is continuing to decrease in price, although some pandemic supply chain related setbacks have made it potentially temporarily a little bit more expensive, but we're seeing those trends continue to go down. And with the state and federal support, Inflation Reduction Act, those kinds of legislations, we're seeing more and more renewable electricity on the horizon, and particularly in the WECC, the Western Electricity Grid, the development of the day-ahead market. It's predicted that's going to also increase renewable electricity production, and the trends you see in other states, Oregon and California, for example. We also know that citing these renewable energy projects is going to be politically challenging. The governor of Washington has pulled together a group to examine siting challenges, particularly along the gorge. But just because that these projects in demand, we know that they might not actually be cited right away. So we're keeping that in mind, and also both qualitatively and quantitatively looking at the transmission capacity restraints within the state and within the region. We also are considering not just electricity and renewable electricity, but the other kinds of alternative fuels, lower carbon fuels that are in research and development right now. So anything from hydrogen, biomethane, aka renewable natural gas, synthetic methane, other biofuels. These are all experiencing more and more support from Washington State and from federal government through laws and incentives. So we're incorporating those into our assumptions. And our understanding is, at least right now, it's potentially possible for 3 to 5% of the current gas supply to be met through an RNG blend using in-state feedstocks only, but we understand there's some expense there. So we're considering where potential RNG sources could come from. And similarly with hydrogen, which, as I mentioned, there is more federal support at this point. And there is even some hydrogen already being produced or coming online very soon within Washington State, I believe in Douglas County. So we've got our eyes on that. And the final trend we looked at was around mobility, thinking about, again, the impact of the pandemic and looking at, are those long-term trends in terms of public transit ridership going down and people using their private cars more? What can we expect there? What does that imply for EV adoption and emissions reduction? And Washington State is putting a lot of funding into transit and municipal fleet electrification. So we're seeing that become more and more emissions free. Active modes are increasing in popularity. Shared mobility of all kinds seems to be something that's here to stay, and it is making up a small share of mobility. And of course, electric vehicles are increasing in popularity. There's kind of still the supply chain bottlenecks and issues with some of the tax credits in terms of where the vehicles are manufactured. But we do anticipate that that's going to continue to take off just based on market trends and the legislation in place currently. So that's an overview of our research so far. We'd like your input on how these trends are playing out and how they affect some of the scenarios we're going to design together. So I think I'm passing it to Darren for the scenario overviews. Nope. Okay, not doing that.
Darren's popular. Everyone wants past you, Darren.
The other Darren.
Hi. So 5 more minutes max, and then we're going to turn the I guess the process over to you all in order to gather your feedback. But I want to I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here to kind of, I guess, set the stage and the context and kind of the starting point, and then we're going to let you all loose on our Miro board or the chat if the Miro doesn't work for you, to get your feedback on these decarbonization pathways and what actions and what policies would you like us to explore. So we're starting with 2 pathways as kind of a starting point. So nothing's been decided. We're not making a decision to say this is where it has to be. We just we needed to kind of create a box or create a structure that we can have some discussion around. And so there's 2 scenarios that you're going to be looking at, and the floor is open for any feedback that you want to give us around those. Between those 2 scenarios, there is some common actions that we also want to get your feedback on and your suggestions. And so these common actions kind of generally revolve around energy efficiency or reducing the amount of energy we use, because we think that's kind of fundamental to helping explore this challenge in the state. So kind of broadly, what we're looking at is kind of actions to maximize mode shifting. So how do we there is the shift from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, but obviously there's still a lot of costs, and if you want to talk about embodied carbon emissions associated with those as well. So how can we actually get out of vehicles and maybe use more transit or even active modes of transportation? Looking at deep retrofits in the existing building stock. Steve had a comment in there about building already strict building standards, and which is true. Washington has been doing a lot of work around new building codes, but existing buildings aren't being addressed very strongly, and we feel that there's some room in there, and we'd love to hear your feedback on that. Efficiency improvements in the building stock. So, heating and cooling equipment, hot water heating, what kind of shifting of technologies can we use within the buildings? Maybe we want to explore passive house energy codes for new buildings. So, maybe there could be, maybe there's a strong desire to do that. Efficiency improvements in industry. Love to hear your comments and recommendations or thoughts about where those can be made and how those can be made. And then there's also carbon capture or carbon storage and sequestration possibilities that could be explored as well. And so broadly, we've kind of, again, as a starting point, created kind of two streams, and you can think of them kind of as extremes, if you will, or bookends of 2 stories. So so we're thinking starting, electrification pathway. What if you electrify everything? We get rid of as many fossil fuels as we can and explore what that would look like. What would the implications of doing that be? So, rapid electrification of existing and commercial that should be residential and commercial heating systems, appliances, putting decentralized solar PV and storage on buildings, increased electrification of commercial transportation, electrification of industrial processes where available. And then that's alternatively, so instead of going all in on electrification, there will be opportunities still for electrification, but looking at kind of where would alternative fuels fit within this mix. So instead of replacing all natural gas with electricity, what are the opportunities for renewable natural gas or hydrogen or other technologies within that space? And then finally, kind of on and then there's also some supply side considerations as well. So renewable electricity, how much can we import? How much can the state import, or how much does it need to import or should import? Utility scale and battery storage is, what are the opportunities for that? In-state production of RNG, synthetic methane production. What are the implications of generating or producing green hydrogen within the state? Obviously, that has some feedback into electricity consumption as well. So these are kind of the starting points, again, the starting points of conversation that we would like all your feedback on. And again, nothing has been decided here. We're definitely interested in hearing what you all want to what you all think and say. And maybe a third scenario will pop out. Maybe we'll maybe there'll be obviously there's going to be extra actions that thrown in there. And we're also looking for the final thing that I want to say is we're also looking for how do you want to parameterize these actions. When parameterization means we have to tell the model something like what to do, right? The model doesn't know what to do without us telling it. So what do we want these, what do we want, how do we describe, in numerically what these actions or these policies should look like? So in an example, this is just an example. So install heat pumps for heating systems in existing residential buildings. So one way of looking at it is that we could target 100% of the existing residential buildings. It could be 50%, it could be 75. So 100% is just a number, a starting point for discussion. Does this feel too high? Does it feel too low? You can use your gut feeling like that. What technologies are we going to use? Is it going to be, mostly air source? Or are we going to include some ground source heat pumps? Does that seem like a viable option? When is this transition going to happen by? Is it going to, should it happen by 2030? Should it happen by 2050? So these are the types of feedback that we're looking for as well. Alternatively, if we were looking at an alternative fuel scenario, so maybe just targeting 100% of existing buildings using natural gas and putting in natural gas air source heat pumps in those buildings. So this is the kind of input that we're hoping to get from you and help us kind of define these scenarios. So with that, I'll stop talking because I definitely want to hear more from you all now in the last hour than I want to speak out towards you. So move over to the Miro board, and I'll get, I think Leah, maybe are you posting the link in the chat, or?
Yep.
Yeah.
I posted it.
Thanks, Leah. And thanks for all of that, Chris, and Carol and Darren. And so I just wanted to sort of go to the chat for quickly. Nisi, I think, and please let me know if I've pronounced your name correctly. Carol's put an answer to your question in the chat. Darren, I just wanted to check with you. Is there anything you'd add to that, or did we cover it off?
Well, I would just add, so what we do with the information that Carol posted from a modeling point of view is that will feed into our hourly analysis. So I mentioned we'll have kind of an hourly demand curve, and then we're going to have an hourly supply curve, and that information is going to help us kind of shape what the hourly supply curve can look like. So we're going to be using Power Council modeling results as a starting point, but then we can diverge away from that. And if we want to model the decommissioning of the Snake Dam, we can kind of lower the available hydro generation, the curve associated with that, and then that becomes a gap that we need to fill in with something else.
Great, thanks very much for that, Darren. Okay. So showtime, everybody. Aliyah has put the link to Miro into the chat. So anyone who has the link can access this. If you are on a phone device, it'll be harder to do, not impossible, but it's still sort of possible to do. And then if it's still too difficult though, you can use the chat and let us know. We can add what you put in the chat directly to the Miro board for you. So we'll take a tour first, and then we'll start to zoom in live as the whole group on those areas to give you a moment in case you're having trouble. If you are having trouble, please holler and let us know. If not, you're good to go and participate wherever you'd like on the board at your own pace. We'll keep talking though, and we'll keep taking questions as we do this too, for this time period in this activity. And I think we should start with a tour just right at the top too, because we've included some information to help you from the presentation about megatrends. So Chris, if you can just zoom up for a second. And I'll bring you all up here with me. So I have the power of Miro to sort of bring you there too. So don't worry if you get lost, we can sort of pull you over. So the mega trends that Carol went through are there for reference too, just in case you wanted to sort of pop up and take a look at those. So those are things that we're taking into consideration, of course. And then down below, if Chris goes down below, and we just had a few people join us, so we'll have Aliyah throw the link back into the Miro for those folks in a moment. We've got the electrification starter scenario, if you will, on the one side at the top here. So above that line is we have common actions for both scenarios. So you'll see this, all these common actions will also appear on the other scenario on the other side of the board, the alternative fuels one that was mentioned in the presentation. So there you go. Everything above the line, common actions for both scenarios. And you can see the specifications right there next to them too. So you can take a good look at that. In between, we have some spaces here for you to sort of fill in some answers to some questions that we have. So in terms of engagement, when I said we're involved and collaborate, what we're essentially asking you is we're giving you some starter options. And we really want to know, what do you like about these things? Like what's correct? You know, what's missing, you know, sort of from this too. If we were having dinner or inviting you over, it's like I would ask you, tell me about a really good dinner. You know, like I've given you a couple of options, you know, do these sort of fit your idea of a good dinner? Or if not, what's wrong about them? What are you allergic to? That kind of thing. So we want to know what opportunities are there for implementation. You can see all the questions here on the pink sort of big stickies. What do you like? What are the barriers that you see to implementation of these actions? And what equity considerations are important to you? If we go below the line, and the stickies are up top there for you to use, so you just click on them and Chris will show you. If you could drag them after you click them, and then if you double click on the sticky itself, you can just start typing and it'll automatically resize your type to the sticky. So and you can adjust the size as well if you'd like. Try not to make them too big and keep them big though, just to make sure we'll fit them in, and we'll come along and auto adjust them, you know, sort of for you. So not to worry. Below the line, if we take a look at electrification, and we'll go below the line, we've got demand side actions and supply side actions in this scenario. And then over to the right, again, you see the same feedback mechanism. We want to know, what do you like? What equity considerations are important for this scenario? What actions essentially are missing? And there's some more starter stickies there for you. So you don't have to worry about creating new ones. You can just grab from the pile there that we've put for you. And then let's go over and then let's take a look at the other side there. And so demand side actions and supply side actions as well for the alternative fuel scenario. And your feedback for that is in purple on the right. Again, the questions are on the stickies there as well. So that's the grand tour of the Miro board. Hopefully that made sense. If there's not, please let us know if you have any questions. Aaliyah's also put that in the chat for you. Is there anyone who's having trouble getting into the Miro board? Please let us know. Okay, so far so good, which is really wonderful to see. If you do run into any trouble or questions, please let us know. And also, if you have a different piece of feedback for us, as Chris mentioned, we do want to hear what you have to say. So we've got those starter questions for you. But if you have something else you want to say, please throw it onto a sticky onto the Miro board. This is your opportunity to give us all the feedback that we need to know about. And I think as worth saying, because we gave you a lot of information, is, you know, I think Darren, you said it best. I think you said like these are sort of beginnings and we need to sort of define things. Did you want to go over to again what doesn't make a good scenario? I thought you made some really good points there that are worth reiterating now that folks are in the activity.
Okay, well, generally, I said it more positively, like what makes a good scenario. but okay, the opposite of that. What wouldn't make a good scenario is if something that is completely implausible. So, you know, we all stop taking any kind of transportation whatsoever. So that's obviously not happening. But we also don't want to be too constrained by you know, conventional wisdom or the theory that, oh, that won't work because the market won't support it. So you want to kind of release those kinds of constraints and try to just sort of, you know, play with different possibilities. So in a way, this is kind of the fun part of what we do, where we sort of take the flight simulator out for a spin.
I like that. Thanks very much for that, Darren. Sean, I think Chris is going to have a solution for you momentarily, but not to worry, we'll be able to get your feedback this evening, whether or not we can get you into the Miro board, or we'll find an alternate way to sort of zoom into areas and get your feedback directly. That way, we're really happy to do that, so not a problem. I'll let Chris let me know if that's what we need to do. But it looks like we're already starting to get some good feedback, so thanks very much, everyone, for that. And again, feel free to hop to any part of the board that intrigues you. You know, you don't have to start on one side necessarily and go to the other. You can start wherever you'd like, wherever makes the most amount of sense. and we've got lots of time. We're doing well for time. And we will also leave this board open for another week past this meeting. So you'll be able to keep the link and you'll still be able to provide feedback. So if you're somebody too, we recognize, again, a lot of information. The presentation will be posted on the website, so you'll be able to take a look at that. We've put the mega trends at the top of this board too to keep, and hopefully that gives you enough informational input to help you provide the feedback that you'd like to provide essentially at this stage. We take, oh, sorry, go ahead. Someone was going to speak.
Oh, sorry, Naomi. Maybe that was just me. I was just waiting for you to finish.
Okay, go for it.
So there's a question about how to enlarge the questions and scenarios. So if you look at your Miro board, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a % symbol. So you can press to zoom in or zoom out, and then to control where you are on the board, you can right-click and hold down your mouse, and then you can use that to help you move around. Yeah, if anybody is having trouble with that, just let us know in the chat and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, so Chris is just moving the board around on the Zoom screen. He's sharing his screen right now. And then once you click on the link, your browser will open up. And what Aaliyah just went through are the controls for how you can zoom in or out and grab things and move around on Miro board. It's just essentially like a really big whiteboard, essentially. And anything that's not a sticky for feedback, we've locked down. So you don't need to worry about accidentally moving anything in that process. You're good to go.
And for those who can't get in the Miro, yep, be patient with us. We're just we're grabbing some screenshots and we're going to put them into the chat as images, and then you can download those from the chat and see them that way.
Yeah. Carolyn, did that help answer your question? Are you able to navigate the way you'd like now, or we
No, I'm still trying to learn how to do this. Sorry. I can't figure out how to put a sticky on, so I'll just figure something out at some point in the future.
Oh, that's okay too. We can go over it again. We went over it pretty fast. So just do you see the Zoom screen for right now? And we'll get Chris to do another demo for you. He's pulled a
Yeah,
yellow.
I need to know how to now grab one of these stickies at the top and stick it to the board. And does it matter? I mean, I know, so we're just addressing just what's above the line on the pink, just randomly, or do you want us to reference what we're talking about?
So yeah, great question. So a couple things. If you click on a sticky, automatically you'll see like a blue box with 4 white points kind of come up. So that means it's live and you've clicked on it, and then you can drag it around or you can double click in it and start typing. In terms of the pink stickies here on the screen, those questions are related to the common actions on the left for electrification. And the blue stickies below are related to the things to the left, the supply side and demand side actions. So we want commentary on the entire scenario. We just divided it up to be the common actions between the two, and then the specific actions underneath that line. So the pink stickies, the blue stickies, and the purple stickies are all areas of feedback. So we've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 questions here for you to give feedback on. And then we've got, I think, another 6 on the other side there as well. So I think a total of 17, sort of primer questions that we have for you for the scenarios themselves. Does that make sense in terms of what we're looking for in terms of feedback? And then I can go back to stickies in terms of how they work in a moment.
Yeah, I figured this out. So, and now I'm just trying to, it's really hard because I can't see everything at once. So.
Yeah. So yeah, it takes a moment and feel free, we've got time. So feel free to take time to get used to zooming in and out and moving the board the way you're comfortable. And then let us know if you have any other, but I'm glad to hear you were able to get a sticky going and that's making sense. So if you need any help with anything else, let us know. And we've got some directions that are also placed in the chat too. Thanks very much, Aaliyah, on how to maneuver stickies. Think of them as like virtual piles too. If you had a pile on a table, that's what we've done. We've just put the whole pile on the table for you so they're easier to grab. Are there any other questions coming up for anybody too? Anything about all the content that we went through? Devin, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Hold on.
Sure, no problem.
I'm just I'm having trouble getting the sticky thing to work. I ended up putting a comment on my sticky instead of text in the sticky note. So how do I put text?
Yeah, no problem. Let's zoom in again. No problem if you put a comment there. We'll show you too. So see the Zoom screen for right now? Do you see the Zoom screen, Devin? You're still on mute.
Yeah, I'm listening to you through my computer, so I have to mute in order to hear you.
Got you. Okay.
Otherwise, you're going to get feedback.
See how Chris grabbed
So
the
I'm
sticky?
talking on my phone, but listening on my computer. So yes, just assume I can hear you.
Okay.
What am I? But what am
Let's
I
go.
looking at? Your Zoom?
Yeah, if you look at the Zoom screen for a moment, Chris is going to
Okay.
do a live demo. So he goes over to the pile of stickies there. He's clicked on one and see how it's got the blue box around it, and he's dragged it over now to the what are the barriers to implementation square. And then then what you do is you just double click. So once you've got the blue bars, double click, and then a cursor will appear and you can start typing. So he starts typing, and then you can just type away as long as you'd like, and it'll resize the text for you. And then you can make the sticky bigger afterwards if you'd like. And
Got it, thanks.
okay, let us know if that doesn't work. We're happy to help and do it again. Or you can also just put some feedback into the chat and we will grab it from the chat and put it onto the Miro board.
So I guess for those who can't get into Miro, and as Darren's friendly trying to get something that's legible out there, maybe we can just start going through some of these. And as Naomi said, this will be open, so this isn't your only opportunity to give feedback today, but we can kind of hover over some of these and talk and describe them to you all. And if you want to take down your notes or something like that, or put some questions in the chat, then that we could add to the Miro board, we can do it that way as well.
Yeah, so yeah, for those of you, if you're still having trouble, here's a different way of giving us some feedback. So the action is, and this is part of the common actions for both scenarios. So deep retrofits in the building stock is the first action there. And the specifications for that one right now are retrofit 95% of existing buildings by 2040 to achieve a 50% reduction in space heating and cooling and other non-water heating energy use. If there's any feedback on that, let us know. And I've got a question sort of just came to me about sending a link and instructions. So we can put the link on the project website because we won't have the emails of people who came to the meeting this evening as it's an open meeting. And so we'll be able to, and the link, if you have it now, if you take it with you, like feel free to save it so that you have the link in meeting today. It's going to be the same link. The link won't change itself. And that way you can still give feedback beyond tonight as well. And I have a question. Will the final actual scenarios each meet the greenhouse gas emissions limits in Washington law by the dates in the law? So Chris, did you want to answer that question? And then I'll go back to reading out the actions.
Yeah, in my mind, I think they should, but we definitely want to hear from you all, and take direction, or take feedback and input from your stakeholders. And I know the UTC definitely has their own ideas as well. But yeah, in my mind, I don't think it would be a feasible scenario if it doesn't at least meet those targets. So meet or exceed would be something I would choose to explore.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Okay. Next action here on the common actions is efficiency improvements in industry. So improve the energy efficiency of industrial facilities not covered by CPP to achieve a 50% reduction in energy use by 2050. If you've got anything to you want us to add to the board about that in terms of feedback, let us know in the chat. Next one is maximum mode shifting. Transfer 10% personal use vehicle trips to electric micromobility, for example, e-bikes or e-scooters in urban counties by 2035. The next one is shift development to higher density residences in urban zones. So fraction of single new builds to be reduced to 25% of new buildings in counties with high urban density by 2040. Next up is carbon storage and sequestration. Deploy sufficient carbon storage and sequestration to offset remaining emissions in excess of the greenhouse gas target. And last of the common actions for these two proposed or sort of starter scenarios tonight, passive house standard energy code for new buildings. So set minimum energy standards for new buildings to reach passive house standards starting in 2035. So Sean, we've got a help article in there for you that hopefully maybe helps with getting access to Miro. But again, if not, we've got the chat as well.
I have a question again. This is Carolyn. I'm just looking at this and this is so random. And I don't see how we apply our comment specifically to the action over here. Or what do we like? What do we dislike? I guess I'm not understanding how what I respond to is going to be even reflected in the appropriate spot.
Some people choose to respond by throwing the name of the action directly at the top of their sticky note and then providing their comment underneath. So that's if you want to get specific with that. Some people have global feedback for us on all of them together. So it's up to you how you'd like to direct the feedback. Is that helpful?
I guess so. It's so hard to see any of this because it's also teeny. So even enlarging it, and then when you enlarge it, you lose the rest of the screen and you're trying to go back to find where you can get to the sticky notes. It's just very, I'm sorry. I guess I'm at the tail end of the boomer generation.
Yeah. You could also move the sticky right here. You don't need to put them necessarily. These kind of blocks, I guess, are meant to structure some questions for you. The stickies can either go kind of near the actions if you want, or you can put them by the question. It's not meant to be constrictive.
Yeah, so if that's easier for you, Carolyn, please feel free to just put your feedback right on the action itself.
I could also suggest, but this might be for the Miro 1 or 2 users, you can make an arrow come out of your sticky and point at something. Those are those little blue dots. I don't know if you want to demonstrate. Yeah, thanks, Chris. So Carolyn, if that helps, you're welcome to do that.
I guess it helps. I've lost my patience for learning new things.
Fair enough. That's understandable. We try to think about the different ways to gather feedback on these types of scenarios, the amount of detail to be able to share as well, so that, we're not sort of finding that balance of sharing enough information without, sort of overwhelm or too much, and not sort of, taking away too much information either. So can understand that. And if you have alternate suggestions for us for the next meetings, we are open to that as well.
Carolyn, as well as anyone else struggling with the Miro board, feel free to provide feedback in the chat, or you can also give us some feedback verbally and we'll note it down.
Great. Aaliyah, do you want to are there any questions coming up on the sticky notes that perhaps we can answer, or anything we should highlight? We're noticing too, there's a lot of people who are able to use Miro, which is great too. So we're collecting your feedback too, and thank you for that.
I'm just scanning the board, so I'll let you know in a moment.
Okay.
Looks like there are some or other versions of the actions uploaded. Are people being able to see them now more clearly, or?
Yeah, Carolyn, if we zoom in a bit more like this, is that easier for you to see?
Well, I've got one screen that has the Zoom up, and I've got the other screen that has the Miro board up. So I'm zooming on one and looking at the other, and just trying to figure it out.
Gotcha. It might be easier to just then don't worry about Zoom for now, just use your Miro board, and then just drag your sticky over to the actions, and that might sort of hopefully reduce some frustration and make it easier to participate. Sean, glad to hear that's better. So we'll on Zoom, we'll stay zoomed in for you. Aaliyah?
We have a question about which industrial processes can fuel switch.
All right, Darren or Chris, who would like to answer that one?
Which table is that under? Is that under alternative fuels or is that a common action?
It's
Okay.
under electrification. So it says the action that the comment is near is deploy electricity in industries, replace 70% fossil fuels with electricity by 2050.
Hi, this is Brett with PSE. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I think that was my comment. Sorry if it's inarticulate. I guess just the 70% number, like where is that coming from? And is it tied to specific industrial processes, or is there any additional information you could provide about that? I think that was the common actions section, but
Yeah. I think that the 70% is probably high. What we were considering is basically displacing what's currently used for making efficiency improvements as much as possible. Considering again load shifting within the industrial sector specifically, and then displacing natural gas with cleaner sources. Chris, do you remember where the spec for that particular action came from?
That definitely, I think, is that high of a number is probably more appropriate for the alternative fuels. But just kind of keeping as a starting point, for the conversation, keeping that same number. I think definitely can push that lower, and any feedback that you have around that would be good too. I think we still need to kind of explore a little bit what processes are that we can actually move around. So that's part of the kind of next phase is looking into that a little bit deeper. I know for some research doing around the transition for the Oregon project we were working on, there are definitely sources for when you're talking about like renewable natural gas and hydrogen, you can replace kind of the fossil fuels at least by 70% by 2050 in that regard. But yeah, electricity might be a little bit harder for sure.
Hey, this is Steve Schoeneman from Puget Sound Energy. Just to comment about hydrogen, this is what I'm working on. Hydrogen is largely an electrification play. You need a significant amount of electricity to make green hydrogen, and I assume that's what you're talking about, and not turquoise hydrogen, which would be coming from natural gas. So we talk about fuel switching. That's I understand what you're saying, but when it comes down to hydrogen, that's largely an electric conversation as well. So it sort of reinforces the conversation around where are we going to get all this additional power and how do we move it through the region. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Steve. And one thing I didn't discuss explicitly in this presentation is we actually do contain that feedback of the added electricity demand that in-state alternative fuel production would create. So we will account for that, to reflect that. And it'll be driven by the assumption that we make in terms of the amount of production that will actually happen within Washington.
So within Washington, what about outside of the state? A lot of our power comes from outside the state right now. And I would, PSE or other utilities, I would expect to continue to source available power from outside of the state. So is it the total amount of power required, or just the amount that can be sourced in Washington?
Well, I guess it would be the amount that can be sourced in Washington would explicitly be included. The interactions required for out-of-state generation, that would kind of show up as an impact of available renewables that could be exported into the state. So we would have to make coherent assumptions about what the electricity trade impact would be in Washington state, given an increase in the region of alternative fuel productions.
This is Carolyn. I have some very significant questions about, so when you have this action here of rapid electrification of existing residential and commercial heating systems, I mean, is this just something that somebody threw out there? Because I'm looking at installing 100% electric heat pumps in existing residential buildings. There's so many variables around the state. There's so many other things, not to mention the availability of these systems. The fact that we're moving from HSPF 1 to HSPF 2, which is going to change the efficiency ratings just in the next year or so. The fact that California is going completely to electric heat pumps, and we're not sure right now that there's even enough manufacturers to manufacture what they need. Not to mention then also, are heat pumps going to be the wave of the future? Is this going to be like, plastic bags, paper bags, plastic bags type of thing? I work with HVAC contractors. Right now, the workforce probably can't even handle this, even if I look out to 2040. And then I also work with Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association, which is all your hearth guys. And we've had what we call wood stove change out programs for years in Washington State, where we give money to people to change out wood stoves to a cleaner burning wood stove or to some other, either a heat pump or it used to be natural gas stoves, to try and get cleaner burning and reduce air emissions. Getting into people's houses and getting these things changed is not easy. And so while we can get some good uptake, it's never going to be 100%. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out, as a person looking at this and saying, is this a realistic part of an action plan? I'm trying to figure out what exactly you're trying to say here when you have that, you're going to have this goal that you could never meet, or that requires some very amazingly aggressive attempts to get into people's homes and force them to change out what they have existing.
Yeah, I think those are all fair points in terms of barriers, and maybe that is a signal that maybe the scenario, the kind of the starting point that we put here isn't possible, and we need to scale back. So this is exactly why we're having this engagement session, so we can get this kind of feedback. So I appreciate your thoughts, Carolyn.
I mean, don't think that, my guys wouldn't love to be told that you get to walk into people's houses and change it out and get all that money. But I mean, just I look at this and it's possibility versus plausibility, I think also too, when you're looking at these. And I think we really do need to deal with the plausible. If we do indeed want to increase energy efficiency, reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, we've got to do it in a way that people buy into it. And I think this would require some pretty draconian things that you'd actually get resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is where the balance comes in, where we want to keep it plausible, but like that bullet point about challenging conventional wisdom. So try to be more transformational in how the scenarios are defined. But I appreciate. I take your point that if it's too transformational, it won't happen. So that's the balance that we try to strike.
Well, and transformation transformation requires education, and it's really nice for us to sit here and say this would be great. But when I look at like the change out programs and you've got to get in, you've got to be able to change that out, you've got to and you're giving people money to do this. You still have people say, no, this is working great. Why do I need to do this? There has to be this educational component, and that takes time. And we talk about, throwing conventional wisdom out the door, and that's great. But human beings are by nature, often they like what they know. And until you really shake them up, they won't change. So but then you also got to remember, in Washington State, we have other things that are going to drive this over time too. So your variables are just huge in this whole thing. So it's like, I'm looking at this and going, electrification, new appliances, that makes sense, because then you're talking about new appliances coming in. You're talking about when somebody goes to the store and needs a new appliance. The education is there for you to be able, it's a teachable moment for somebody they're coming in to buy their new washer, their new dryer, their new refrigerator, their new whatever. And you can talk to them and let them know this is actually, if you've got a gas stove, if you go to an induction, this is going to happen. This works. We can do it for that. It's this cost. So you get a teachable moment. And then it's a time when you can work with them on, hey, you could also change out your system to be this. But once again, where's the money going to be to do that? Because those are not cheap.
Thank you, Carolyn. Those are all really great points and questions, as Darren was saying. So what I've been doing is noting those down, so they're part of our feedback. I do see two other hands raised. So maybe we could go to Brett and then DEK and Carolyn, then we could come back to you if you have any additional comments you would like to add.
Thanks. Yeah, I generally echo Carolyn's comments and wanted to thank Carolyn for providing that helpful vocal feedback. I think the comment I wanted to make is I empathize with one of the earlier speakers who was talking about it being difficult to follow the Miro board, and it's an interesting format, but it's kind of difficult to address and sort of collectively discuss some of the complex and nuanced topics that are being presented and at issue in the actions and specifications tables. So I guess my question is, and also sort of like how is that feedback that goes into the Miro board incorporated? Is it like going to be part of the report, or is it does it inform the modeling? I guess just curious about that generally. And then second, I guess, are there plans to sort of use or allow for a different forum of discussion, like in the remainder of the engagement period, or at any point, like sort of written suggestions, comments, things like that? I mean, we ultimately want to be helpful and provide feedback that helps you all. So we're just not entirely clear on the best way to do that, like whether the Miro board's that venue or whether it's something else. Just wanted to inquire because some of these topics could be pages of discussion or entire meetings in themselves. So it's hard to kind of write a post-it sometimes, but just my 2 cents. Thanks for the
Brett.
opportunity to comment. Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brett. I'm going to start off, and then if my colleagues have further things to add, so Carol, Chris, or Darren, please do jump in. We understand that these are deep and big topics, and that's why we've tried to contextualize too. Like, we have 4 meetings essentially to do as open meetings. We also are hearing from folks on the Decarbonization Advisory Committee, same types of meetings, same topics, that come up. And that's why we're not presenting you with everything, sort of all at once. So tonight is about taking a look at some sample scenarios and finding out from this group what's working and what doesn't work about that, and what still questions that, essentially remain, so that we're not having to have give a 35-page document, and try to have one meeting, sort of and comment on that. So we're taking you through this stage by stage in order to make the feedback opportunities manageable, but also to impact the process of the decarbonization's pathway examination. Like, it follows the step-by-step approach. So the feedback that is given to us tonight is, and alongside too with what happened at the DAG meeting, too, which is the same meeting as this, we take that feedback and we take a look at it and we synthesize it. So we might do some qualitative analysis, or some of it's just straight, easy to, sort of handle. And just like at the beginning of this meeting, Chris talked about what we had heard so far. So from meeting 1, this is meeting 2 out of 4, what we did with feedback that we'd already heard and how it was incorporated in that stage of the process. So earlier in the process, we asked earlier questions about where we were with respect to modeling and took that feedback in. And that influenced what you see sort of tonight as well. So what we get tonight will influence the next stage. So I hope that that's clear, but let me know if that isn't. One of the best ways to come to these meetings, of course, and participate and provide your feedback. And that's why we've essentially opened up the book, right, on potential detailed scenarios here, so that you can get as detailed essentially as you'd like. There is on the project website an email too, where you can sort of submit written feedback that way as well, if you would like to, as well. And then we leave this board open for a week. So we recognize, as we mentioned, that this is a lot of information, essentially to take in, and we don't expect everyone to just give us all their feedback right now in meeting. We want you to have time, to consider it too, and give us that feedback in your own time as well. So hopefully that answers that question for you. So the things that I want to stress is that this is not a one and done process. There's multiple stages or stops in the creation of the pathways to be examined. The questions even that were asked tonight, they're really good ones that we need to know about. There's certainly questions that we hear about. We do climate action planning all over North America and South America, sort of currently too. And so there's a lot of similarities that come up, and we're glad to hear that you're asking those questions, because they're really, I think, considered, questions, too. And this is without a doubt a big process. So that's where we're at. We're at an examination. This is not meant to be a plan at the end of the day. This is meant to be pathways that are that have received enough feedback, to go forward for further sort of analysis, and part of a larger sort of process. So with that, I probably have said enough, or maybe a little too much. Chris, is there anything that you would add or clarify in what I said?
No, I think that covers it. Yeah. So yeah, many opportunities for feedback. And I know Jason has his hand up. I don't know if Jason, you wanted to respond directly to Brett before we go to DEK, which I'm assuming are your initials, but maybe we'll let Jason talk and then we'll get to your question.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to stress that, it would be unfortunate if, whether it be technology or a limitation in some of the time and discussion, limited feedback or opportunities. So just to support what Naomi was discussing, there is an email address on the UTC webpage related to this. You can please forward your feedback in through email if that's more convenient as well. Definitely want to make sure that we incorporate as much as possible. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jason. And Samantha, did you have a follow-up as well?
Yeah, I'll just be really brief. And that's just to say that while we may not address every comment, we will certainly address comments collaboratively in the report to some degree and continually along the way, but that this is very much developing the report. And again, we're not making any decisions or advising on specific pathways. This is showing the breadth of the possibilities to the legislature. So thank you all for giving as much and as in many avenues as you can to comment on it.
Yeah, so thanks. And Samantha said it more eloquently than I did. So thank you very much for that. It's an important point that we're not making any of those decisions. DEK, sorry, we don't know your name. So, but you're up next.
Hi, yes, this is actually Devin. I'm logged on twice here because I just had to move to my computer to see the board. Anyway, so I had a question kind of following up on Carolyn's comments about the by 2040 electrification. So the way I read it wasn't that we would be like forcing people to pull out perfectly good heating or cooling systems or whatever, and making them go electric, but more that it was like as things were needing to be replaced, at least by 2040, we would say this the options are electric. Is that what's intended with that, or?
We can, thank you very much for that distinction. We can actually model it either way. So our model explicitly represents the stock of heat systems, including a natural lifespan. So there is a point in time where they are retired and they need to be replaced with something. So we can either model that action as at the point of replacement, or we can also model it more aggressively as in you retire it before its end of life and you put in a new system.
Yeah, so I would agree that the retiring before end of life would not be, people would not like that, I would guess, especially if they're being made to pay for it. But yes, but as things retire, I could see the benefit of having, okay, the options are electric because we can't continue putting greenhouse gases from these fossil machines. So, but in that case also, if there is something that is, a known quantity, we're going to do this at this point in time, that would, I think, help also address, well, are we going to have, enough heat pumps to do this? Are we going to have enough of this? Because if businesses and contractors know that this is coming, then they can plan for it. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's definitely like a lot more, you can rely on it more than you can, well, we don't know what that consumer is going to put in their house because there's no, it's kind of up in the air. So I don't know, I guess I would just add that as a plus for that approach, is that if there's some consistency that people can rely on and know it's coming, they can plan for it. And yeah, and just retiring things as they need to, rather than, you know, before their end of life, I guess. So I'll try to add those in Post-its, but I appreciate that clarification.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Carolyn.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that because that clarification is pretty important. But it also sort of was bringing up some additional, I mean, there are questions. And I think just as you're developing the action items, I mean, if you're developing multiple, it also, when you're looking at something like this, might be worthwhile looking at some off-ramps or some scenarios. So let's say you have a neighborhood right now that's got a lot of natural gas running to it, and they're using natural gas in a lot of their existing appliances, and you start to change them out. And they have, let's say they have a gas fireplace as their backup heat, and the electricity goes out. Will that gas line still be available to use their backup system? And I guess that's when I look at this 100% electric, where's the resiliency, and how do you build the resiliency into that system? You know, the hope is going forward that as we kind of move towards this, that we're either looking at how do you retain some level of natural gas for backup heating, backup cooking in power outages and things like that. Are we installing, you know, do we need to look at solar powered generators of some sort or something for neighborhoods or multifamily? Wood stoves are not an option in a lot of these areas. Combine this electrification of existing residential areas with the one to move to higher density residences in urban zones. There's some significant problems even now with siting heat pumps in areas because of the noise ordinances for that neighborhood. So once again, I'm getting into all these variables, but I'm just trying to say, and then combine that with just under the 2018 building code with the requirement, some of the requirements to use certain energy efficient heat pumps that became not available because of the supply chain issues post-pandemic. So it's how do you build this action? And I guess it's one thing to say, oh, let's look at our utopia. I love looking at, you know, what's the utopia? What do we want to see? But then backing it up to what are the realities that you throw in there to sort of make it actually be once again, you want to meet a goal, and you don't want to just set a goal, and then when you get to, you know, 2039, you're going, we're never going to meet that. You want to set a goal that's actually realistic, and what kind of realistic scenarios do you build into this to try and say, okay, so rapid electrification of existing residential and commercial heating systems, you know, tier it, you know, we need to look at these parts of the state first, or this type of thing, or these types of areas, or make sure that this technology is available for backup and, you know, for these types of areas. So I just keep thinking about, you know, there's just all these variables. And I guess you know, it's nice to put one thing out there. And I think we think of this we're just going to get rid of gas, or we're going to move to electric, but how do we deal with all the various scenarios that are out there right now, and how do you create those off ramps in policy? And that's, I think, something that's just going to be a challenge overall. But if you set the goals realistically, and then at least provide some assumptions of something that should go along to take care of that, any of these variables, like what's the backup source if that power goes, if primary system goes out, what's the backup, that type of thing, that then helps you move to the goal, because you're giving people their backup. You're giving people saying, we're going to do this. This is what happens. And if this goes out, we've got this, and that type of thing. And it's, I guess maybe I'm getting too into the weeds, but I just look at the realistic of this. So
yeah, thanks, Carolyn. So it's a good thing we record these meetings. So that's another way of us gathering your feedback, you know, as well. Certainly what I would say is this is at the level of a pathways examination. So many of the questions that you ask or concerns that you raise Some of them belong here and some of them are more granular than the scope of what this project actually is. So certainly we can strategically set direction that's worth further examination, itself and planning. This is not sort of the level of, this isn't even a plan. This isn't, and if it were something like a climate action plan, or if you were doing a climate action plan, it's again at a higher level than some of the kind of questions that you're referencing. It's about setting yourself, sort of down a certain direction, right? And then further figuring out the details as you go along. Realisticness is certainly a part of that. And certainly that's what Darren mentioned in her presentation. And Devin, if you have a question, I'm going to have to move us along pretty soon too. So if you want to pop it in the chat for us too, if that's possible, I'll make sure we come to it before we close and move on to next steps. So I want to make sure we don't miss that for you. But I'm going to turn it over to Darren, because I think she has some things too, Carolyn, that might be helpful as well. And we'll incorporate too in terms of what you've mentioned tonight on the Miro board as well after the meeting. So Darren.
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly, we are considering resiliency to a point. That's I think Chris mentioned we're going to be doing some exploration of extreme weather events. So if you get a cold day or a cold series of days, what does that do to your peak demand, and can you provide the space conditioning service under that conditions? And that's where we would introduce, where we would explore different backup options at that level. Also, I would say that concerns about supply chain, that could very well be a short-term barrier that might not, be the same, state 2040, and that's the kind of thing that we don't know and we can't predict. So we try to just make broad assumptions that that we'll have the supply of heat pumps that will be required for whatever we're assuming.
I'll just add to Darren's comments another way of, or another thing that's included in here around retrofitting buildings and improving energy efficiency that might address some of the thermal comfort issues, at least around power loss, in terms of retaining heat or cooling, as it were, during peak periods or extreme periods. And then in terms of heat pump development, manufacturing, certainly there are supply chain issues. One thing that we've noted is the Federal Defense Production Act has been deployed to increase the supply of heat pumps. So that's partially where we're kind of drawing a trend line there in terms of there's federal government incentive and support for manufacturing within the US.
Great, thank you both. Thanks for those comments. So we'll go to Devin, and then we're going to go to next steps. So just wanted to point out that hitting the greenhouse gas reductions goals is not just an idealistic dream, it is a necessity to preserve a livable planet. These are complicated questions, but we need to find answers that will meet reduction goals. Thank you very much for that, Devin. I placed another comment in the chat at the bottom so it's easy for you to see. So we've got the link to the project website. The presentation will go up there afterwards. And after this next step slide, the Miro board tables are in there as well. If you're finding Miro is not a preferable way for you to give us feedback, that's okay. We can also take it via email too. So we've got multiple ways for you to provide feedback for us. And of course, keep the Miro board link and it'll be open for another week for you to continue to give feedback if you're okay with that way as well. All right, over to Chris.
Thanks, Naomi. Next steps obviously is to consolidate all your feedback. And like was said, the Miro board will be open for another week, and then you also have the opportunity to send your feedback via various other avenues, as mentioned, through the web portal, through the emails. So we'll collate all that up, take all your feedback in, and we will start modeling different decarbonization pathways and start generating some results that we will bring back to the group. I believe, Aaliyah, sometime in December is when we're hoping to schedule something there. And then we're also going to be, in the meantime too, layering on financial analysis when we'll be sending out, again, we'll be sending out the assumptions for those as well, broadly to the public, and to be open for feedback and gathering data on sources for those financial analysis. And then the third and not final, but third stage is again doing some co-benefits and equity analysis around each of the scenarios that that we've decided as a broader group to explore, because obviously just transition as part of this is very important, and not just reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but making sure everybody's included in that transition as well. So we're including that as part of the analysis also. So those will be presented to you in in a variety of ways over the next couple of meetings that we're going to be having. So stay tuned for that information. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end. I don't know if Jason and or Samantha want to have any final closing words to the group.
This is Jason Lewis, and I appreciate everyone's time and patience as we got through the meeting. Gonna turn it over to Sam, but just really do appreciate everyone contributing, and look forward very much to working with you on this project. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Please continue to, apologies about the toddler in the background. Just continue to check the website, deliver your comments via the provided email. If you have additional comments that you feel like can't completely be elaborated through the Miro board. And yeah, please continue to collaborate at these meetings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. As we promised, we wanted to get you out of here on time. So there's 3 minutes to spare. So hope you have a lovely evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.